It was May 15, 1972, and Governor George Wallace of Alabama was shaking hands with supporters at a campaign stop in Laurel, Maryland, when gunfire erupted. 4 bullets struck him, leaving the once powerful figure paralyzed from the waist down. In that moment, the man who had dominated Alabama politics for over a decade, the fiery populist who once vowed segregation forever, saw his ambition for the presidency vanish in a flash of gun smoke and chaos. But Wallace's story just wasn't about political theater or racial defiance. Behind the public bluster was a web of money, influence, and control that stretched across Alabama's government. His administration operated like a personal stronghold, where contracts went to friends, opponents were punished, and state funds often blurred the line between politics and profit. Wallace learned early that power in the South wasn't simply won through elections, it was bought, traded, and enforced. What began as a crusade for the common man evolved into one of the most entrenched political machines in American history. Wallace mastered the art of populist manipulation, using fear and resentment as currency, while quietly consolidating wealth and loyalty through corruption and intimidation. By the time the bullets stopped him, George Wallace had built an empire of power that no scandal, rival, or investigation could fully dismantle, at least not yet. Who was George Wallace? What shaped his politics and career? Why was he controversial? Hello, I'm Colin Heaton, former history professor, Army and Marine Corps veteran, and welcome to this episode of Forgotten History. George Wallace was born August 25, 1919, in Clio, Alabama. A farmer's son, he had 2 younger brothers, Gerald and Jack, and a younger sister named Mary Ann. When his father died in 1937, his mother had to sell their farmland to pay existing mortgages. Wallace worked his way through the University of Alabama Law School and fought as an amateur boxer to make money, graduating in 1942. Early in 1943, Wallace was accepted for pilot training by the United States Army Air Forces. Soon afterwards, Wallace contracted life-threatening spinal meningitis, but prompt medical attention with sulfa drugs saved his life. Left with partial hearing loss and permanent nerve damage, he was instead trained as a flight engineer. During 1945, as a member of a B-29 crew with the 468th Bombardment Group, stationed in the Mariana Islands as part of the 20th Air Force under General Curtis E. LeMay, Wallace took part in air raids on Japan and reached the rank of staff sergeant. In mid-1945, Wallace received an early discharge on medical grounds due to severe anxiety and a 10% disability pension for psychoneurosis. After the war, he served as Assistant State's Attorney in 1946, after which he was elected to 2 terms in the state legislature. In 1952, he became the circuit judge of the 3rd Judicial Circuit in Alabama, where he became known as the Fighting Little Judge. He gained a reputation for fairness regardless of the race of the plaintiff. It was common practice at the time for judges in the area to refer to black lawyers by their first names, and their white colleagues were addressed formally as Mr., but black lawyer J.L. Chestnut later said that, quote, Judge George Wallace was the most liberal judge that I had ever practiced law in front of. He was the first judge in Alabama to call me Mr. in a courtroom. On the other hand, Wallace issued injunctions to prevent the removal of segregation signs in rail terminals, becoming the first Southern judge to do so. As judge, Wallace granted probation to some black people, which may have cost him the 1958 gubernatorial election to segregationist candidate John M. Patterson, who had been endorsed by the Ku Klux Klan. Realizing he was fighting against the establishment and the KKK, he changed his approach and opposed expanding voter registration of black people and blocked civil rights organizations and federal efforts to review Barber County voting lists. His defiance of the U.S. Commission on Civil Rights investigation of discrimination in black voting rights law saw him cited for criminal contempt of court in 1959. Wallace's preoccupation with race was based on his belief that black Americans constituted a separate and inferior race. He held his judicial post until 1959. Wallace hired Asa Earl Carter as a speechwriter. Carter was a well-known Klan-affiliated white supremacist, and some of Wallace's most famous segregationist rhetoric was derived from Carter's writing. Wallace finally won the governorship of Alabama in 1962 on a platform emphasizing segregation and economic issues. Wallace took the oath of office on January 14, 1963, standing on the gold star marking the spot where, nearly 102 years earlier, Jefferson Davis was sworn in as the provisional president of the Confederate States of America. In his inaugural speech, Wallace said, "In the name of the greatest people that have ever trod this earth, I draw the line in the dust and toss the gauntlet before the feet of tyranny. And I say segregation now, segregation tomorrow, segregation forever."
Segregation now, segregation tomorrow, and segregation forever.
Within his first year in office, Wallace kept his pledge to stand in the schoolhouse door by blocking the enrollment of black students at the University of Alabama. Wallace physically blocked black students Vivian Malone and James Hood from enrolling. President John F. Kennedy had federalized the Alabama National Guard under Executive Order 11111, and General Henry Graham, commanding the Guard, approached Wallace and ordered him to step aside. Wallace, realizing he was outmatched by the federal force, moved, and the students enrolled under armed protection. This was a symbolic humiliation for Wallace. It broadcast nationwide that the federal government would override state officials using military authority if necessary. He still used state troopers to intimidate civil rights activists and tried to invoke states' rights as legal cover for maintaining Jim Crow segregation. Wallace built his career on racist, segregationist policies that made him the face of resistance to the civil rights movement. Further confrontations at Tuskegee, Birmingham, Huntsville, and Mobile made him a nationwide symbol of intransigence toward racial integration in the schools. Under Wallace, Alabama's state police and local law enforcement agencies harassed, beat, and arrested civil rights activists. In a 1963 letter to a social studies teacher, Wallace stated that black Americans were inclined to criminality, especially atrocious acts such as rape, assault, and murder, because of a high incidence of venereal disease. Desegregation, he wrote, would lead to intermarriage, and eventually our race will be deteriorated to that of the mongrel complexity. He refused to protect peaceful demonstrators in Birmingham and Selma, instead allowing or encouraging police brutality, most notoriously during Bloody Sunday in 1965, when marchers were attacked on the Edmund Pettus Bridge. Federal suits against Alabama state agencies that denied equal access to education, voting, and public facilities can be attributed to Wallace directly. Wallace founded a paramilitary KKK splinter group called the Original Ku Klux Klan of the Confederacy. Afterward, Klan group members committed a brutal assault against a black man, and 4 were convicted. Then, in 1963, a parole board appointed by Wallace commuted their sentences. Wallace did not lead the Ku Klux Klan or publicly declare membership, but as he adopted a stronger segregationist stance, he effectively welcomed, or at least did not reject, support from white supremacist groups that helped build his political base. George Wallace's connection to the KKK was indirect but significant. He employed Asa Earl Carter, the known Klan affiliate and speechwriter, and who helped him use rhetoric favored by white supremacists and benefited politically from white supremacist activity in Alabama. He refused Klan endorsements early on, but later evolved into a politician whose record and speeches dovetailed closely with Klan goals and ideology. His public posture and alliances made him a de facto ally of Klan interests, even if he wasn't a Klan operative publicly. He branded himself as the defender of the Southern way of life against federal tyranny. Passage of the Civil Rights Act of 1964 outlawed racial discrimination in public accommodations and employment, empowered the Justice Department to sue non-compliant states or institutions, and created the Equal Employment Opportunity Commission to enforce compliance. As a result, Wallace's own policies instantly became illegal under federal law. Alabama officials who followed his orders risked prosecution or loss of federal funds. Wallace's loud opposition was noted. The passing of the Voting Rights Act of 1965 following Bloody Sunday in Selma placed Alabama under federal oversight for elections and federal intervention, and deepened when President Lyndon B. Johnson deployed federal protection for civil rights marchers. The law now nullified the voter suppression system that Wallace had defended. Things such as literacy tests, poll taxes, and register intimidation were over. Attorney General Robert F. Kennedy and later Nicholas Katzenbach made Alabama a legal battleground for federal supremacy. Federal education and infrastructure funds were threatened or withdrawn unless Alabama complied with integration mandates. This forced reluctant school boards and local governments to break with Wallace, undermining his states' rights stance to keep funding. The FBI monitored Wallace's administration for civil rights violations, Klan ties, and threats against activists. Though J. Edgar Hoover was no civil rights hero, the FBI still tracked Alabama's violent response to integration and used that intelligence to justify further federal intervention. The federal government used every lever available, troops, courts, law, and money, to crush Wallace's segregationist obstruction. He didn't back down out of conscience. He was cornered by the Constitution. Because Wallace was legally ineligible for re-election, his first wife, Lorleen, successfully ran for governor in 1966, but she died in office in 1968. That year, Wallace was a vigorous but unsuccessful third-party candidate for the U.S. presidency, and his selected running mate was retired U.S. Air Force General Curtis E. LeMay, under whom he served in World War II. During an interview that I, your humble narrator, conducted for my book Above the Reich, LeMay discussed his controversial choice to join George Wallace's 1968 campaign, admitting, and I quote LeMay, "I caught a lot of shit for it. I was hesitant because of his stance on race, his defense of Jim Crow, and his reputation as a segregationist Democrat." LeMay went on to say, quote, "Nixon disappointed me, as he was no conservative. Wallace was a former Air Force enlisted man who flew in bombers against Japan during the war, and Nixon was a former naval officer. Both had military credentials, but Wallace ran as an independent, not a Democrat. Nixon ran as a Republican and proved to be no conservative." End quote. Wallace ended up winning 13% of the vote in 5 southern states as the nominee of the anti-liberal American Independent Party. He drew support mainly from white Southerners and blue-collar workers disenchanted with Democratic policies. On May 15, 1972, during Wallace's second campaign bid for presidency at an outdoor rally in Laurel Shopping Center in Laurel, Maryland, during Wallace's presidential primary campaign, he was shot by 21-year-old Arthur H. Bremer, who had also stalked President Richard Nixon earlier that spring. His diary later confirmed notoriety, not ideology, was his primary motive. After Wallace finished speaking and moved to shake hands, Bremer pushed forward and fired a .38 caliber revolver, hitting Wallace 4 times, leaving 1 bullet lodged in his spine. 3 bystanders were also wounded: Alabama State Trooper E.C. Doddard, campaign worker Dora Thompson, and Secret Service agent Nick Zarvos. Wallace was left permanently paralyzed from the waist down. Wallace was rushed to Holy Cross Hospital, Silver Spring, Maryland, and underwent surgery. Despite being near death that night, he won the Maryland and Michigan primaries the next day, but the shooting effectively ended his national campaign. The assassination attempt reshaped Alabama politics, and he governed from a wheelchair thereafter and became a touchstone in discussions of candidate security and fame-seeking attackers. Bremer was convicted in Maryland and initially sentenced to 63 years, which was reduced on appeal to 53 years. He served 35 years and was released in 2007 under supervision. His diary was published in 1973 as a book titled An Assassin's Diary. Wallace was re-elected to the governorship in 1974, and again he campaigned for the Democratic presidential nomination for a 4th time in 1976. In the 1980s, Wallace renounced his segregationist ideology and sought reconciliation with civil rights leaders. In 1982, he sought a new term as governor and won the election with substantial support from black voters. He retired from politics in 1987 because of ill health. George Wallace died on September 13, 1998 in Montgomery, Alabama. In the end, his life was one of deep contradictions, a man who rose through division, yet spent his later years seeking forgiveness and reconciliation. His name remains etched in American history as both a warning and a lesson about the power and peril of political ambition. Thank you for watching this episode of Forgotten History. If you liked what you saw, please click like, share, and subscribe. And if you would like to assist with the ever-increasing cost of production, please consider becoming a channel member and joining our Patreon page. Please check out our merchandise store. And thanks for watching.